Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. The bustling streets of New York City in 1926 were a far cry from the tranquil meadows of England that Newt Scamander called home. As he stepped off the gangplank of the steamship, his battered leather suitcase clutched tightly in his hand, Newt couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The towering skyscrapers seemed to scrape the very heavens, while the cacophony of automobile horns and shouting street vendors assaulted his senses. Newt's unruly mop of reddish-brown hair ruffled in the brisk autumn breeze as he made his way through the crowded dock. His blue coat, though worn, stood out among the sea of drab grays and browns worn by the nomads or muggles, as they were called back home. But it wasn't the fashion that set Newt apart. It was the secret he carried within his seemingly ordinary suitcase. For Newt Scamander was no ordinary British tourist. He was a magizoologist, an expert in magical creatures. And his suitcase contained a menagerie of fantastic beasts, each more wondrous and potentially dangerous than the last. His mission in America was twofold: to release a thunderbird named Frank back into its natural habitat in Arizona, and to continue his research for his book, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. As Newt navigated the bustling streets, his keen eyes couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. Posters plastered on walls spoke of a rising threat: the Second Sailors, a group dedicated to exposing and eradicating wizardkind. It was a stark reminder that the relationship between magical and non-magical communities was far more strained in America than in Britain. Lost in thought, Newt almost missed the commotion. Outside the Steen National Bank, a rotund woman was passionately addressing a small crowd, her voice shrill with fervor. "The magical menace is among us. We must flush out these devils before they destroy us all." Newt's attention, however, was drawn to something else entirely. A small, mischievous creature was slipping out of his suitcase, a niffler with its duck-like bill and penchant for anything shiny. Before Newt could react, the niffler had scampered into the bank, its beady eyes gleaming with the promise of treasure. "Bugger," Newt muttered under his breath, quickly following the creature into the bank. In his haste, he bumped into a stocky, good-natured man, carrying a briefcase similar to his own. "Sorry, so sorry," Newt mumbled, his eyes darting around for any sign of the escaped niffler. The man, Jacob Kowalski, merely nodded too, preoccupied with his own mission to secure a loan for his dream bakery, to pay much attention to the distracted Englishman. What followed was a comedy of errors. As Newt attempted to capture the niffler without exposing magic to the nomad population, vaults mysteriously opened, coins seemed to float in midair, and bank patrons found themselves suddenly devoid of their jewelry. In the chaos, Newt's path crossed once again with Jacob's, resulting in an accidental swap of their identical suitcases. It wasn't until Newt was safely outside the bank, niffler reluctantly stuffed back into the case, that he realized his mistake. The weight was all wrong. This wasn't his suitcase full of magical creatures, but an ordinary one filled with pastry samples. Panic gripped Newt's heart as the implications set in. Somewhere in New York, an unsuspecting nomad was walking around with a suitcase full of fantastic beasts, each capable of causing untold mayhem if released. As if the situation wasn't complicated enough, A determined-looking witch approached Newt, her wand discreetly pointed at him. "Mr. Scamander," she said, her voice low and authoritative, "I'm Tina Goldstein, from the Magical Congress of the United States of America. You're under arrest for breach of the International Statute of Secrecy." Newt's mind raced. He had to find Jacob and recover his suitcase before any of his creatures escaped. But first, he needed to deal with this unexpected complication from MACUSA. "There's been a misunderstanding," Newt began, but Tina was having none of it. With a firm grip on his arm, she began to lead him towards the Woolworth Building, the secret headquarters of MACUSA. As they walked, Newt's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of Jacob or his creatures. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city streets, and Newt knew that many of his nocturnal beasts would soon become active. Time was running out. Inside MACUSA, Newt found himself in a world both familiar and foreign. The Art Deco splendor of the magical headquarters was impressive, but the atmosphere was tense. Wanted posters of a dark wizard named Gellert Grindelwald lined the walls, and Urors rushed about with grim expressions. Tina led Newt to a dimly lit interrogation room, where he finally had a chance to explain himself. As he described the escaped Niffler and the mix-up with the suitcases, Tina's expression changed from skepticism to concern. "Do you have any idea how serious this is?" she asked, pacing the room. "If any of your creatures are seen by nomads, it could mean war between our worlds. We have to find that suitcase immediately." Newt nodded, relieved that Tina seemed to be coming around to his side. "I couldn't agree more. But we'll need to move quickly. Some of my creatures can be quite mischievous after dark." As if on cue, an alarm sounded throughout the building. A harried-looking wizard burst into the room, his eyes wide with panic. "There's been a breach. Something's tearing up the 21st Street Market." Tina and Newt exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Without another word, they rushed out of MACUSA and into the gathering darkness of the New York night. The scene at the market was one of utter chaos. Fruit stands were overturned, leaving trails of smashed produce in their wake. Nomads ran screaming from an invisible force that seemed to delight in causing mayhem. Newt immediately recognized the telltale signs of his erumpent, a creature that resembled a rhinoceros, but was far more volatile. "We need to clear the area," Newt said urgently to Tina. "An erumpent in mating season can be extremely dangerous." As Tina worked to evacuate the nomads and contain the situation, Newt reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a vial of glittering liquid, with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. He began to mimic the erumpent mating dance. The vial of erumpent musk held out before him like a lure. The invisible beast, drawn by the scent and the dance, began to calm. Slowly, carefully, Newt led it away from the market and into a nearby alley. With a flick of his wand, he opened a shimmering portal in midair, an entrance to the magical realm within his true suitcase, which he had managed to recover from a very confused Jacob Kowalski earlier that evening. As the erumpent lumbered through the portal, Newt breathed a sigh of relief. One creature down, but there were still several unaccounted for. And the night was young. Taina rejoined him, her face flushed with exertion and worry. "That was too close," she said. "We need to find the rest of your creatures before they expose our world." Newt nodded grimly. "Agreed. But we'll need help. There's someone I think we should find first." That someone turned out to be Jacob Kowalski, the nomad who had accidentally become entangled in their magical predicament. They found him in his tiny apartment, surrounded by the wreckage caused by some of Newt's escaped creatures. Despite the destruction, or perhaps because of it, Jacob's face was alight with wonder. "You're a wizard," he said to Newt, his voice filled with awe. "A real, honest-to-God wizard." Newt couldn't help but smile at Jacob's enthusiasm. It was refreshing to see someone react with joy, rather than fear, to the magical world. "Indeed I am," he replied. "And I'm terribly sorry about the mess. But I'm afraid I'm going to need your help." As Newt explained the situation, Taina's sister Queenie arrived. Drawn by the commotion, a natural Legilimens, Queenie immediately sensed Jacob's kind heart and became smitten, adding another layer of complexity to their already complicated situation. With their unlikely team assembled, they set out into the night, following the trail of magical destruction left by Newt's creatures. From Central Park to the depths of the New York subway system, they tracked and recaptured beast after beast: a mischievous niffler in a jewelry store, a mooncalf herd grazing in Central Park, and a troublesome Okemi expanding to fill a Macy's department store. Were just a few of the challenges they faced. Throughout their adventures, the bonds between the four grew stronger. Newt found himself opening up to Taina, sharing his passion for magical creatures and his dream of promoting understanding rather than fear. Jacob, despite being overwhelmed by the magical world, proved to be brave and resourceful, and Queenie's warmth and empathy helped to smooth over the tensions that arose. But as dawn broke over the city, they realized that their problems were far from over. The magical exposure caused by Newt's creatures had not gone unnoticed by MACUSA. Horrors were now hunting them, led by the ruthless Percival Graves, who seemed to have his own agenda. Moreover, a dark force was moving through the city, leaving destruction in its wake. An obscurus, a parasitical magical force created when young witches and wizards are forced to suppress their magic, was terrorizing New York, and all evidence pointed to Credence Barabone, the adopted son of the second Seymour leader, as the host. As the situation spiraled out of control, Newt and his friends found themselves at the center of a conflict that threatened to expose the magical world and ignite a war between wizards and nomads.